Thanks for being with me today, John.
You're most welcome.
Now, John, your grandfather started Arataki Honey. It's one of the biggest honey businesses in New Zealand. You've been in the business your whole life. Most of your family are in the business. You've been through Varroa coming in, the Manuka boom. Can you tell us what it's like to be a beekeeper in New Zealand today?
It's not that flash at the moment. Times are pretty hard. Prices are down, and Varroa has become an absolute nightmare.
More so than before.
Much more so than 5 years ago.
How's that?
It's partly the chemical strips we use are not working as well, and partly the viruses have built up to the point where it takes a lot less Varroa to kill a hive than it used to.
Yeah, so that's not fun. So I was talking to you the other day, and you said you've been experimenting with some new methods recently.
Yeah, mostly with fogging, with oxalic acid. It certainly kills Varroa, but the main trouble is you have to treat probably every 5 days for maybe 5 treatments in a row. So a lot of visits, a lot of work. Very cheap for treatment. It's only a few cents a treatment, but a lot of time. So there's very little information on just how often. There's lots of suppositions about, you should treat every 3 days, every 4 days, whatever. But at the moment, I'm doing some long-term studies on just what happens when you treat every 5 days or every 6 days, and just seeing what falls down. But you get some big mite drop. Frame hives with 2 frames of bees, and I'm getting up to 300 mites dropping a day. So whether they'll survive the winter is a bit doubtful.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that you're getting some success out of it. Now, as we were talking about, we're going to be having some listener questions today, and I do have a question here about Varroa, so I'll play that one first.
Just a quick question. I've only got one hive in my backyard. So do I need to worry about checking for the mites, being that they're not in Victoria? I've heard that there's some herbs that I can plant around it to keep them away. I'd appreciate your advice.
Yeah, interesting question. So,
yeah,
as we're recording this at the moment, in most of Australia, we don't have Varroa. It is in New South Wales, but where I live, it's not here. So people are a little bit, they're unsure of what to do. There's some sort of rumors that there's some plants and things that you can plant that helps, and people are trying to get to know what treatments they should be using. So what do you think about that?
Well, if you're not sure if you've got Varroa or not, you need to be checking at least when the hives build up in the spring, when they've got drone brood. If you check your drone brood, if you don't find any Varroa in your drone brood, then you probably haven't got any. The quickest check, if you run your hive in a double brood box, when you split those 2 brood boxes, and they'll often have a bit of drone brood built between the top and bottom of the frames. And if you look immediately after splitting, if you look at that and you can see the pink eye and the pupa, the drone pupa, if there's no Varroa on them, then you haven't got a problem. As far as planting herbs and that sort of thing, it's a nice idea, but it won't save your hives. Nothing short of really effective treatments will control Varroa. It is just so severe. If you can get hold of some resistant queens, which you won't be able to yet in Australia, that would help. But just be ready. And when you get Varroa, when you finally see it, the whole aim of everything you do should be to keep it down to the very minimum number of Varroa for the whole year. Just if you're going to treat with organic acids or thiamol or anything like that, you need to treat before the Varroa get out of hand. You need to treat when there's just a few Varroa in there, and it'll be far more effective. If you wait till the hive's nearly dead, then the only thing that will save it is synthetic treatments.
Yeah, interesting. So for someone who does have one hive in their backyard, what's the best sort of annual treatment regime, do you think?
Well, 5 years ago, I would have said just treat in spring and autumn, using Babe Roll in the spring and Apivar in the spring and Babe Roll in the autumn. Used to work beautifully. Now, you probably, in Hawke's Bay here, you probably need to do at least 3 treatments a year, minimum. So you've got treatments in for 6 months of the year anyway.
So you mean these days you think Apivar in the spring, and then you're still using Babe Roll?
No, we're seeing significant resistance to Babe Roll.
Okay.
It's hard to tell, but I suspect we're seeing a bit of resistance to Apivar as well. It doesn't seem to be as effective as it has been in the past. Still pretty good, but like I say, it seems to take a lot less Varroa to kill a hive than it used to. We used to case, probably in the first 10 years, I don't know, might have lost 20 hives to Varroa out of 2,000. It wasn't a big deal, but you get the odd yard with a Varroa would get away on you, and you think, these going to be all right. They'd have parasitic mite syndrome. They'd look pretty bad. You put treatments in them, and most of them would survive. Now, if you put treatments in, if there's any sign of parasitic mite syndrome, those hives are going to die. No matter what you do, they'll just, even if all the mites are gone, but the viruses just keep on killing the hives. It doesn't happen to everybody every year. But one of the worst cases I know, a beekeeper had 8,000 hives, more experienced than me, doing a good job. By the end of they had a good honey crop. By the end of the autumn, they had 2,500 hives alive.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So if
common throughout the Waikato Rotorua area that season.
Okay. So what would you recommend is the best thing that, someone, even if it's one hive or if it's 100 hives, what's the best annual treatment regime that you would recommend for the moment?
Well, hopefully you've got mites that aren't resistant to synthetic treatments. In that case, I don't know what your rules are in Australia. In New Zealand, we can't use Apivar while the honey supers are on the hives. So we tend to use that in the spring, and we tended to use Babe Roll in the autumn because we could use that when honey supers were on the hives. I think for someone with 1 or 2 hives, I'll be looking at doing a synthetic treatment in the spring, a synthetic treatment in the autumn, and 2 or 3 treatments over the summer using something like thymol or oxalic acid strips, or if you can afford it, an oxalic acid fogger. They're very good at killing phoretic mites that are not in the brood.
Yes.
The other thing you could do is deliberately, you're not so worried about honey crop and want to keep your hive alive, get one of the new frames that you can lock your queen up so she can't breed.
Yes.
And when there's no brood left in the hive, give it an oxalic fog, and that should take care of all your problems for at least 3 months. Yeah.
And some of those oxalic acid foggers, the smaller ones, they're fairly affordable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they take a while, but you wouldn't want to be doing 20 or 30 hives with them. But if you've only got 1 or 2 hives, they're quite cheap.
Yeah, oxalic acid itself costs nothing.
Yeah,
I got given a 20-kilo bag the other day. But you do have to be careful with it. You don't want to breathe it in. It does. Yeah. I've only been using it for about 7 months. But it seems to have an effect on nosema as well. I can't prove that, but the hives just seem so much healthier than they have for a few years. They're looking really good. And really worried me the first time I use it. When you put this fog into the hive, and it's you think, oh God, this is going to kill them. And you get the odd bee comes out looking white, covered in the stuff, and you come back and have a look, and they just a week later, and they just look so good, so healthy. The brood looks better. It's just I don't know. It's just I don't think it's a miracle cure, but it's better than some of the other treatments.
All right. Well, let's. Sorry.
I did do a lot of work in the early days with thymol,
Yes.
and it's a moderately effective treatment, but it's not. It's one of those things. Absolutely, you've got to use it before the mites get away. If you
Mm-hmm.
you can't wait until there's literally thousands of mites in the hive.
Mm-hmm.
Keep your
Okay.
mites down to as close to zero as you can get the whole time. You can
Mm.
do at home. You can do things like drone brood trapping too. Put in at the right time of year. Put in the Varroa really like drone brood, so put in drone frames, and then when they're sealed, take them out, feed them to the chooks. That's a good way to control Varroa, but you've got to be on the ball. If you forget them for a week and all those drones hatch out, all those Varroas hatch out, and it's worse than if you hadn't done it in the first place.
Yeah, and that's a great idea with the chooks, but you could also chuck it in the freezer if you don't have chickens, which is another good way of doing it. All right, let's head to the next question. Thanks for that, John. I've got another question here. We'll play this one.
What are the pros and cons of running double queen hives all year round? In our area, that is the southwest, where we have cold winters.
Okay, so that was the question from Mark there. Double queen hives. What do you think about those, John?
There's lots of different ways of running two queen hives. When we used to do quite a lot of them, but it was basically you just had two separate hives all spring, and when the honey flows one above the other with a separate entrance, and when the honey flow started, you took that, put a box of foundation above the bottom hive, put a couple of sheets of newspaper on top, stuck a stick in to make an extra entrance where their old entrance used to be, and just left them to it. A lot of beekeepers in the South Island run two queens, one in each brood box with an excluder between and an excluder above. I don't know anybody that runs two queen hives over the winter. They run them as single queen hives over the winter and then two queen them in the spring.
Mm-hmm. So have you ever seen the arrangement where people put two 10-frame boxes down and then a single stack of supers above? Ends up looking like an upside down T?
Oh, I know what you mean, yeah.
Have you ever seen that?
Yes. I've never experimented with it, but all my hives are on pallets.
Yes.
And the type of top cover we used to use could also be used as a split board and have a little entrance in it. If you turn them all over, you could have it so when the hives are in a square, there's a little square in the middle, and these entrances all faced each other if you turn them all over, and the bees would go from one hive to another, and if you had a weaker hive, they would fill up. If they got too full, they'd go and fill up the hive next door. And my father did extensive trials with that, and it worked very well. But the big problem was if anything went queenless, then they wouldn't replace the queen. They would just stay a queenless hive. So, and then we discontinued it.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. So just for Mark there, there's a guy in Canada, his name's Brad Hogg, and I had him on my other podcast a couple of months ago, and he used to run two queen hives, and he said the same thing. He said that was the biggest problem, that if you had them out producing honey, if one of them went queenless, they wouldn't requeen the other one. So they would just maintain one queen in one of the boxes. And so what the arrangement he had is he'd have the two brood boxes on a pallet, and then he would have a single stack of supers running above with a queen excluder under it. And the bees could basically go through each brood box and look like an upside down T, as I just said before. But if one of the hives on the bottom lost their queen, they wouldn't requeen, and so you'd end up with just an empty box on one side. And he said he kept having that issue, and so he'd go back after to get his honey, and it just wasn't effective. But one thing he said that was positive is that if you're doing comb honey, apparently it works a little better for comb honey. What do you think about that?
I've specialised in comb honey all my life, but I did a lot of experiments with different types of two queen hives, and I found that generally it was easier to run two separate hives, and I generally got more honey from the two separate hives.
Yeah. Well, that's the same thing as Brad said. He said it was a cool system, and if it worked well, they produced a lot of honey, and it was very effective. But the times that it didn't work, it made it too inefficient, and it was better off just doing the old traditional single queen in the hive. That's what he thought anyway. I haven't personally tried it, but that's what he was doing.
In a really good season, you could get more. Sometimes you get more honey from a two queen hive. But if it turned out to be a poor season, they could just become a nightmare too. Just the way we used to do it, you'd end up with there'd be 2 boxes of brood and a box of honey and a box of brood and a box of honey and a box of brood, and it was just we didn't used to use excluders much. I do use them now, but if I had some spare hives in the spring, I'd be tempted to run a few two queens, but some of them used to get up to about 9 high. You used to have to use a ladder. I'm not sure I could get up a ladder and take down a box of honey. I can still chuck boxes of honey around, but I'm not sure about using a ladder to do it anymore.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing you said there in the middle. You said you used to use excluders and now, you used to not use them, but now you use them a bit. What made you change your mind?
Well, it's partly the extractors, where you take the honey to get extracted, they don't like brood in the honey anymore. It increases the bacterial level in the honey and that sort of thing, which is fair enough.
What was the advantage of not having them?
Well, my father always used to call them honey excluders.
Okay.
In some years, hives will tend to cram down rather than come up. Some years it doesn't seem to make any difference at all. I come straight through the excluder and fill the boxes up. And when you just get a bit of a flow, it's not a heavy flow, they'll often just cram down. And if you don't have that excluder, they'll go up. But equally, you can get a year when they just putz around all year. And if you don't have excluders on, you can come back and there'll be 3 boxes of brood and the light box of honey on top, as if you had an excluder. They're forced to slow down their breeding, and they put more honey in. I used to be really against excluders, but for probably 20 years now, I've used them on everything, and I much prefer them. It's a lot easier when you're removing the honey if there's no brood in there.
Yeah, you can just take the box and go.
Yeah, I run all my hives in two full depth brood boxes. I know it's more common, I think, in Australia to use just one box. The big advantage of using one box is it makes Varroa treatment a lot easier and quite a bit cheaper, because you only need half as much treatment. But I did a lot of experiments here, and I definitely got more honey when I had them in 2 brood boxes.
Okay, interesting. All right, I've got one more listener question here. This one's from Chris.
Hey, I had a question about bees swarming. I was wondering, why do they do this, and how can you prevent it? I don't have any experience yet with beekeeping myself, but I have been around them swarming, and I would imagine if you're putting the time and effort into building a home for them and maintaining them, you want them to stay there and help you out. So, yeah, I was just curious about this.
Swarming. That's a good one, isn't it? Something we all have to worry about.
Yeah. First of all, every beekeeper has hives that swarm. I don't know anybody that stops it 100% of the time. It's how bees reproduce. It's sheep have lambs, bees have swarms. Without it, they wouldn't survive in nature. Genetics is important. If you breed from stock that is not prone to swarming, you will get a lot less swarming. Some of the worst strains of bees, like the first bees they brought to New Zealand, they were keeping them in skeps, and I've heard reports of them swarming up to 11 times a year.
Yeah.
Nasty little black bees.
Yeah. Okay.
And like for my own breeding, I only breed from hives that have from queens that are 2 years old and have never shown any sign of swarming. The main thing is to keep them, not to cram them down too much. When they need a box, give them a box. If you've got a hive if you've got two hives and one's really weak and one's really strong and looking like swarming, the simplest thing you can do is just swap the two hives over, swap their positions over, so all the field bees go into the weak hive, the strong hive loses all its field bees, and you gain, both hives gain from that experience. If they are raising cells and you don't have anything to swap it with, you don't have anything that needs extra frames of brood, all you can do is go through, very carefully shake the bees off all the brood frames and go through and cut off every cell. But man, they're good at hiding them. I don't know how many you've seen, Brent, but I've probably seen up to 40 swarm cells in a hive.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot.
They'll tuck them into little corners. And what I was trained to do is to, if you're worried about swarming at all, is to split the two brood boxes and just look underneath the second box. And probably at least 9 times out of 10, if they're raising cells, you'll see them hanging down in that space, in that gap between the top bars and the bottom bars. If you don't see them there, then that's fine. A lot of hives, especially if you've got carniolan stock, they'll have what I always call them dummy cells. I think there are other names for them, but they're sort of practice queen cells. And most hives will have those. As long as they don't have eggs or larvae in them, it's not a problem. If you're supering up from 2 stories to putting a third box on above an excluder, or you're putting a box above an excluder, and you're worried about swarming, I find it's a good idea to lift a frame or 2 of sealed brood up above the excluder and put a couple of frames of foundation spaced out in the second box. That also helps with swarm control, and it forces them to go through the excluder.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about genetics. I noticed that when I started bringing in some really good genetics into my apiary, I noticed immediately that the swarming really dropped off. And in some cases, I've had, some really nice bees that didn't tend to swarm. And I remember once I had some hives in an area that I kind of forgot about them a little bit in spring. I was like, oh, whoa, I forgot I put them over there in this out apiary. And I went back and they were totally full, honey in the lid and everything. It hadn't swarmed. I thought, oh, that's amazing. And it was from that stock. And so genetics can be a big part of it, which is a really good thing. And another thing that people can do is clipping wings of the queens. What do you think about that?
I've never done it.
Never done it?
I've never done it.
Because a lot of people swear by having clipped wings means that the queens don't fly away when you have a swarm, and it's easier to get them back.
If they're pushed hard enough, apparently the virgins will swarm. Certainly the worst swarming we have here is in November, when it's nothing to do with hives being too full. It's when we get a dearth period between the main spring flows and the main summer flows. And, the bees might be 3 or 4 boxes of bees. You're probably feeding them because they're getting hungry, and they just there's plenty of pollen, and they'll just raise swarm cells then, and they'll not only swarm with the old queen going, but the first virgin to hatch will take half the bees as well, and the next virgin will take half the bees, and the next virgin will take half the bees, and you end up with most of your hives being a handful of queenless bees and nothing left in the yard. It's just it doesn't happen every year, but when it does, boy, it's hard to control. And when that happens, you've just got to hit the hives really hard, take lots of sealed brood out of them, replace it with foundation, and check them every 10 days until the honey flow starts. But hopefully you don't have that problem over there. It's just limited area here that it happens, but it's a nightmare.
Do you find that first year queens, second year queens, any difference between the two of them in terms of swarming?
I've heard lots of talk about that. I suspect if you've got a spring queen, it's probably less likely to swarm. But most of my requeening is done in the autumn because we have a lot more settled weather then. And I've looked back through a lot of my beekeeping records, and I cannot see any significant difference and swarming between 1-year-old and 2-year-old queens.
And what I mean by that is they're queens that have been through one winter versus queens that have been through 2 winters. You don't see any difference.
Not significant, no. I certainly I looked at this a few years ago, and if anything, it was slightly worse than the 1-year-old queens.
Okay.
Which is not what's supposed to be happening, but then every area is different, every hive is different, every season is different. You can make generalities about bees, but it's, after nearly 60 years of beekeeping, I still make mistakes. I still don't get it right.
60
I get
years.
it right
That's quite an accomplishment. 60 years. How about that?
Yeah.
Since
Got my first hive when I was 8.
8 years old. Wow. Yeah. So 60 years in the bees.
I'm 67 years old now, so I've still got another year to go.
Okay. And then it's 60. That's amazing.
But I met some friends at a beekeepers meeting a couple of weeks ago, Helen and John Wright, and he's 80 something.
Okay.
He's been doing it like 20 years longer than me.
Okay. So given the fact that you've been doing it for 60 years, what's a good bit of advice you could give to someone starting out?
Join a local club or get a mentor.
Yep.
It really helps.
Absolutely.
And learn from the bees. You see a lot of people working hives without veils or smokers or anything, and the smoker is your best friend. It absolutely should be possible to work bees without wearing a veil, but you have to get to understand how the bees behave and how to behave around bees. And until you do that, you're a lot safer to wear a bit of protective gear.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's it's they're out to get you sometimes. You got to cover up.
Yeah, there are bad days.
Absolutely.
I was out with my brother once, and around home here, I don't wear a veil. If I'm just working 1 or 2 hives, it doesn't worry me. But we were taking off a full load of honey, and we're 2 hours from home, and he'd left his veil at home. And what do we do? And he thought, we'll give it a go. He was working as fast as me, and he got 1 sting all day, which wasn't bad. But that's
amazing. Yeah, that it is funny sometimes. I'll be driving past an out apiary. I have this one apiary that's sort of my quarantine site. If I ever take a friend's hive, they don't want it anymore, or maybe I'll take a relocated beehive or something like that out there. Just leave it alone, go and check it a few months later. It's nowhere near my mating apiary. And I just happened to be driving past it a couple of years ago, and I thought, I haven't been here. I want to go and check these hives. And I had nothing with me. I thought, should I go for it? And of course, they got me. They got me good. I was running pretty fast. My dad happened to be with me at the time, and I think he had his phone out recording it, and he thought it was hilarious.
Selecting for nice temperament bees is really important. It's just it just makes life so much easier for you and so much safer for everybody else. There are people can die from bee stings. It's
and that's one thing.
Bees, the better.
Yeah, and that's one mistake that I made when I first started. I was watching YouTube, and I was seeing all these people not wearing a suit and just going into the bees, and I thought, I should be doing that too. So I started refusing to wear a suit, and I was just getting destroyed every single time. And it wasn't until I learned that genetics is a massive part of it. When I started bringing in some really nice bees, now I don't wear a suit most of the time now. But in the early days, if you're just getting swarms or bees from your local area, don't try it without a suit. They're going to destroy you. Especially if you've got a bit of bad weather. Yeah,
I did a trip to England a few years ago to visit some beekeeping friends, and I went out with one who was still running AMMs, and he's very proud of his black British bee stock, and
they love it over there.
Every bit as nasty as I remember as a child working those hives. They're just horrible. I had a veil on, but I'd failed to zip it up quite, just that little triangle under your chin. And I got 5 stings within about 5 seconds of opening the hive up on my face. And it's like,
oh, wow.
I thought maybe this is England. And then later on, I went down to Devon, and I went out with another friend, a commercial beekeeper down there, and he's working with Buckfast bees.
Yep.
And we were taking off honey without a veil on. Bees didn't even look at us.
Mm-hmm.
And my son's bees in Norway, they're a really nice Carniolan strain, and they're the same. You can, in fact, they're probably better than mine. We were taking the honey off one day, loading them onto the truck the next morning, shifting them over the mountains into the heather, and then putting them down, and then supering them up because it's too far to go back again.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, we did wear a veil when we were supering them up, but they were just like, no, we don't care. It was, my bees are very nice, but they wouldn't take that sort of treatment.
Yeah, I haven't seen AMMBs personally. I'll go and check them out one day. But yeah. Anyway, John, we'll finish up there. And thanks a lot for answering those questions. I really appreciate your wealth of experience there and helping us out. And how's your season looking coming up?
It's looking early. It's still the middle of winter here, but wattles and stuff are now in flower. Some of the plums some of the pollinations a month ahead of normal. Don't know. I don't really like early seasons. I prefer ordinary seasons or late seasons. You tend to get too much frost and too much cold weather and stuff, and it's we shall see. It's certainly turned cold and nasty now. Yeah,
well, all the best with it. We've still got a few weeks to wait, but all the best with it. And thanks again for coming on the show today.
You're most welcome, Brent. Thank you. Bye.
Well, thanks again, John, for being on the podcast today. Really appreciate that. He was on my podcast actually 2 years ago. That's my other podcast, Breeding the Honeybee, and we were talking about his queen rearing experience. And isn't it amazing? He's been keeping bees for almost 60 years, so such a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate him coming and sharing that with us today and doing the first episode of this podcast. That's fantastic. So thanks again, John. And thanks to all of you for coming along and listening and supporting this podcast. It's the first episode of this new podcast, and I'm going to be doing it monthly, and we're going to be answering your beekeeping questions. So if you've got a question that you've had for a few years that you're just not sure about beekeeping, maybe it's getting through winter or getting some extra honey or what type of tool to use, what type of hive, you can submit that question by going to the show notes in this episode, clicking on the link that says submit a question. It'll take you through to my website. There's a little record button there. You push down the button. You can do it on your phone. It's super easy. Takes you 30 seconds or maybe a couple of minutes if you want to re-record it a few times, and you can do that. You can record it the first time. If you're not happy, record it again, and then you just press submit and it comes straight to me, and we'll put it into one of the next episodes. So each month I'm going to be having a different one of my friends coming and co-hosting. So they've all got a lot of experience, and even if we get the same question a few times, it'll be great to get some different perspectives on that. Okay, so thanks again, and I'll catch you on the next episode.